All right, listeners. Today we have a special guest, Katie from Oregon. She is the wife and mom to two. She mentors women and holds circles to help women heal and honor their birth experience. Katie, I'm so excited that you're here with us today. I feel like our story is this divine timing of just connection that we realized we even knew someone together. But you've reached out to me, and the work you do, I can't wait for you to share it on the podcast, because I myself was really taken by what you do and why you do it, and could have used you as my mentor 15 years ago after my daughter's birth. So tell us a little bit about you and your story and what you do for women, and share all of that with our listeners.
Sure. Thank you. So this work that I'm doing now all started back pre-children. I was studying biodynamic craniosacral therapy, which is all about how trauma lives in our body. And my teacher was trained in birth psychology and healing, and he told us all about the birth process and how a natural birth unfolds one way and does all these amazing things for our physiology, and then all this intervention and more medicalized ways that we're born has some impacts on our nervous system. And he had a saying that how we do birth is how we do life. And so then I was just obsessed with like how everyone is born and how it shows up, how they are in the world and all this stuff. So then that was prior to becoming a mom. Then in 2011, I became a mother. And even holding all this knowledge, I had a horrible experience giving birth. I wanted a home birth. I ended up in a very medicalized C-section situation. It was traumatic for both me and my child. And I was devastated. It was devastating. And so I was already a body worker and a healer and knew all this stuff. And I started looking and seeking and seeing people. I was receiving all these different modalities, going to different healers. And over time, I got better and I healed. And so now I'm offering this Reclaim Your Birth Circle. I also do the work one-on-one with women, and I feel like it's my pay it forward passion project that, I've taken from all the different things that that were effective and supportive to my healing. And I've taken trainings, in-depth trainings with more practitioners, people where their work really resonated for me. And I've brought it into a whole system that is a circle format. In the future, I'm hoping to launch a self-guided course so people can do it on their own and their own time and leisure. And one-on-one. Some people are more comfortable working in a group. Some people want to do it one-on-one. But this is all to say that we use this when it's a circle. There's not only the work that I'm offering people, which is based in helping to resolve trauma from the system. These are very practical embodiment tools. We do a lot of meditation and journaling and reflection to help to see how the trauma is showing up in your day-to-day life, in your experiences of being a mother, in your experiences with your interactions with your child and your partner. So that's like the practical side of it, seeing how neurobiology really, it's out of our control that these things are happening. And then by getting this information, you start to see like, oh, I am getting triggered by this thing my kid is doing. Oh, that does maybe have to do with how they came into the world and how it affected both of us. Oh, here's where I can be resourceful in this moment now and create more connection and presence and coherence. That's the practical side of it. Then I bring another layer to it, which is ceremonial. And that is more of the shamanic, energetic realm of actually doing the spirit work for both the mother and the child. And that is a very feminine experience. It's very much going into this vastness, this mystery, this kind of memory place that you never know what's going to show up for people and what they're going to get out of it when you take them on this experience. And it just blows me away every time. Women see things that they just had no idea were even running in the background. With the trauma and the trigger stuff, it's like you kind of know when you hear about it and learn how to work with it. You kind of know like, oh, am I a fighter or do I flee? Or am I someone who just kind of freezes and I don't know what to do, so I don't do anything? You kind of already have that sense of yourself, but the ceremony piece, it's so beautiful. And it's like bringing this feminine energy to one of the most feminine things you can do on the planet, which is birth a child. So for me, that was really a missing piece in all the talk therapy and everything. I was receiving regular craniosacral therapy, which was wonderful for my nervous system and this trauma piece. I was receiving, talk therapy, but the ceremony piece added a layer and a depth to the healing. And the wonderful thing about ceremony is that you can practice it over and over and again, and you always receive more. You receive more healing, more insight. And what I noticed from doing it was really a missing piece that helped me to honor that although my birth had not gone the way that I had wanted, the way that I had hoped in its outer form, I could really reclaim the sacredness of what my daughter and I went through to get her here. And for me, that was really the medicine that I needed. And for a lot of women, that seems to be a really powerful piece that is missing from their experience. When their birth becomes so medical and mechanized, they lose that connection to the sacred, to the mystery, to the vastness, and to wonder. They lose that connection to wonder. And this, so this is their chance. No matter how old their kid is, whether they're a few months old, or I've taken women through this process where their kids are grown. They're in their 60s. Their kids are grown. Their kids are starting to think about having kids. And
when you shared that with me last week when we were chatting, I was shocked because I think at first I probably thought like even someone like myself who had a traumatic birth experience times 2 was too far removed from the birth experience. Like I thought, okay, well, I've done my healing. I, did some holistic modalities, did some therapy, just processed it myself, and that, okay, everything's good. But to really think about the femininity of it and the sacredness of that birth, that's not something that I honored, even as someone who worked with midwives. And it just wasn't something in the forefront of my mind at that point. But it really intrigued me that you can do this at any stage of your life when you want to reclaim that sacredness of the birth of your child. And what a deep connection and bond that you're solidifying in that femininity and the divinity of the birth and everything as you provide this, and the women that go through it. Because I just think there's so many layers to birth that there can be a disconnect in the bond from whatever reason. And, I believe when I had my daughters, most of the time that was talked about only in the scenario where the child's either birthed and then taken because they have a medical emergency, or the mother has a medical emergency, or in the afterbirth time period of she couldn't nurse her baby. That bond was, or that became a disconnect. And there's so many more layers to birth or to trauma in birth. I only ever looked at my second daughter as the traumatic birth because I had a near-death experience. I never looked at my oldest as a traumatic birth experience. But in our conversation, I had shared that even in the past month, I was talking to my one friend about physical symptoms my daughter has, and symptoms I used to feel when she was swimming, or sensations, I should say. I was afraid she was going to drown, but clearly she was capable. She was on the high school swim team. She knew how to dive in and get up and pull herself up. It still would paralyze me, and I would feel this pressure in my chest. And we're talking 15 years after her birth. Never did I look at her birth being traumatic, although it did not go as planned. I thought I was going to do a water birth. I ended up on Pitocin. I ended up with her, I had the epidural. It was 17 hours before I took the epidural, and then it still lasted another 7 hours. And when she came out, she wasn't breathing right away. She was wrapped in her cord. So there's so much trauma there, but I just sort of scooted it under the rug. We're good. She's latching. She's healthy. We're just moving on. However, it was 9 months after her birth that my first major panic attacks came out. And anyway, so I was just really intrigued and interested in the vastness of the age that you can work with women and really just go back and reclaim that. And I imagine solidify the bond with the mother and the child, even if they're 60 and 40, or, in my case, in my 40s and my daughter's in my teens, that there can just be a whole new perspective of that time period.
Yeah, it's really beautiful and really sweet to see what people report back as, for some women, they've never felt like there was really a disconnect in their bond with their child, but it's more how they relate to themselves as a mother. And then for others, it's all about their connection to their child.
So true. Just that somewhere a disconnect showed up afterwards, whether it was within the sacredness of their own body or their child. I just, I could see that. And I even see the resonance in today's conversations that we're having about bodies, women's bodies and young girls, and the sacredness of loving themselves and their body just the way it is. And how even just a disconnect of the mother with her body could create a disconnect that her daughter senses. And it's just generationally taken on. And I don't know. I find your work profound and intriguing. And, I I really thought when you first reached out, I was like, oh, birth trauma. I had a birth trauma. This is going to be really fun to get to know her. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, like how often do we really hear a woman say it went exactly as she planned?
Yeah.
That doesn't really happen.
No, I often hear that women, after having a difficult experience the first time, have a redemptive or repaired or inspiring experience, like their next time they birth, or another, like if they have more children, then they're able to do the work that they need to show up in birth the way they want to, and to show up. They approach it differently based on what they learned from the first birth. I hear a lot of straightforward first birth stories, like the birth went straightforward, but there's always something for somebody. Like, it's just, we're our modern culture, we're not in a village where there's a birthing woman, someone giving birth on the regular. We're not having lots and lots and lots of children. Like, as women, we're very disconnected and cut out, and it is like, oh, you go to the hospital, it's like a way. Even if you're having a home birth, I mean, how many people have attended somebody's home birth before birthing themselves? Unless you're a birth professional, it's like extremely rare that you would have attended a birth. So that's all to say that I think that that's part of where the trauma is getting locked in for so many of us, because we're not in touch with the feminine process of this very intense rite of passage. And when it is a transformative experience, it's going into different parts of our brain. Our spirit is called forth in a different way. I mean, it is a time that is different than your normal day-to-day time. And the brain states that you go into while you're birthing are very different. And so even if women haven't had an experience with that, being in these different brain states, if they're always in their thinking mind, doing mind, like they're linear, then going into that, the prefrontal cortex, the forebrain, really powers down when you're in the birth process, so that you can just go into that slower brainwave state. It becomes very physical. It becomes very embodied when it's a healthy, undisturbed.
Right. I was just going to say
naturally progressing experience, like the ideal. I say quotes because there's no ideal. So if you haven't even had experiences with that, you might be like, women will report, oh, I felt like I was crazy. I couldn't think. I was like out of my body, and it's like, it's actually kind of designed to take you into that state, but not even being able to relate to that state might feel traumatic to you.
Right. Well, and also what's coming up for me as I'm hearing you is that we as a society do not share. It's just, we're not really being raised in a society, not just that we're not seeing other births, but that we don't even always share about our births. I mean, we just say like, oh, it was a lovely, it was lovely. Or no, we absolutely, like, it was really painful. I would never do that again. And
we share in a linear, like very like a linear way. We share like this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Like, we don't talk about like the wild side of it, like the animal side of it. It's a very animal.
It's like, that's how we are about life. Like, we're not going to share any, like, to me, womanhood and motherhood is so wild.
Mm-hmm.
if we lean into that, if we're not
Yes.
quick to just cover up what is happening
Yes.
and not share because we're afraid to say something because, I believe, and it is my hope, but I do truly believe based on who I'm meeting and the world is bringing into my realm that that is shifting. We're coming back into the divine feminine of owning, who we are and our stories and sharing them for the collective and for, to me, it feels like for that future generation of women to step into womanhood and motherhood, just knowing how sacred, she is and knowing the support. Like we are, I think like, I don't know, like I was in a play group afterwards. Like we had all taken prenatal swimming together. So then we all stayed in a play group. But when I think about it, we did not share. Like it was maybe one every 8 playgroup meetings, which were weekly, that somebody would, say a struggle that they were having. You were almost more so coming together eventually for the kids to be together, but just for socialization. It wasn't, because we weren't working at that point or whatnot, but we were not coming together and sharing the beauty of and the mess of motherhood, but how the mess is so beautiful in its own right. And we as a society have just gotten away from sharing that. I mean, it's very similar when you speak of how we don't see births before we are in our own birth. It's very similar to death. It's like those two phases of life we have completely shut out, whereas everything natural from our ancestors, we would have been in it. You would have been caring for the deceased or the dying, as they were there. You would have known what signs were coming, not Googling what's happening or calling on, the doctor and all these interventions. You would have just allowed things to transpire. And I think that's the same for birth. You would allow birth to that's why I chose to use a midwife. My body didn't necessarily cooperate for whatever reason that was for the first time. And maybe, we were 8 days late. So, late, although I knew it never felt like she was going to come on time. Just based on knowing my cycle. I think that's another thing. Like we've gotten so far removed to really knowing our cycle. So they give us a date, but we could probably pinpoint a better date for them in a heartbeat. But we've gotten so far. I was far away from that when I had my daughter at 24. But it's just, however things transpired, my body didn't respond. So then I was on Pitocin. And so now we're adding in all these externals versus just allowing the beauty of the unfolding of whatever is going to happen. And I think we were for a period of time very far away from the connection of allowing the beauty of birth. And so now we have had a time period where I believe there are so many women that have been taught to jump towards the interventions, jump towards, every possible, doctor that could be in the room, everything versus being surrounded and held in a sacred space with other women helping you who have been through it and have been helping you. It's such a beautiful time that we've made it beautiful, but it's like the beautiful part is when the baby's here. We've gotten away from the beauty of what happens in the birth time period, like when you're in birth versus baby's arrived. Okay, clean mom up. Everything's fine.
Yeah. I mean, everything you're speaking to, it's like, for me, I feel like it's like this patriarchal world culture that we live in, like has even infiltrated mothering. The most feminine thing you could possibly do has become masculine.
Right.
And, it becomes very mechanized. It wants to be in control. It wants to know. It wants to feel contained.
Mm-hmm.
It wants to march forward in a predictable manner. And
It's not.
the feminine is, it's like, in this book I actually just read, by Britta Bushnell, called Transformed by Birth. And she's a birth educator, but she also has a PhD in mythology. And she was talking about Artemis and Apollo. And Artemis is like the divine feminine. She's wild and she's unpredictable, and she's like in the night, and she's just of the woods and of nature. And and I think that that's really the energy that needs to come more forward and online for women when they are going into birth. Whereas Apollo is like what we're seeing in birth. It's controlled, it's mechanized, it's predictable, it's marching forward in this,
right. If you don't, if it doesn't happen in 8 hours, we'll do this. If it doesn't happen in another 2, we'll do this.
And there's nothing wrong with, wanting to be, of course, safety and health is extremely important in birth. And there needs to be a balance. And I think that that's like what is being desired in birth. And then I think what I'm seeing when I'm working with women on the other end, they've gone through this portal. And like for a lot of them, it's like, oh, well, I wanted that safety and control so much that they sacrificed the experience of being really connected to the feminine, mysterious energy of it just unfolding from their inherent well, like the inherent knowledge, the inherent wisdom we all hold inside our bodies, inside our wombs. That's like, it's our birthright to give birth is our birthright. But so this is, the Reclaim Your Birth Circle is like, okay, you didn't get that. You realize that like, oh, like my mothering doesn't feel exactly how I was wanting it to feel. I've done spiritual work at other points in my life. I've done different kinds of meditation and whatnot. And now like I'm ready to bring some of that to honor my birth experience. That, for a lot of people, it is just like really a coming home and a stepping fully into their archetype as mother in a very like honoring and loving way.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm imagining that you're holding these ceremonies on Zoom, or are you
We're doing everything. So I did them in the Bay Area before with my teacher, Gina McCarthy of Birth Spirituality and Healing. That's who trained me in the basic framework that I use. I bring in other pieces from some other people's work as well. We did those in person. Then I moved. Then the pandemic happened. And my plan was to start them in person here in Portland, Oregon. But the pandemic provided me an opportunity to do them online. So that's what we're doing now.
Yeah. The beauty of online. And, I say often a year ago or 2 years ago, I would have never thought the depth of the connection you could get online.
Yeah.
You really can. I think I thought of it as more like certification type meetings or, business meetings, but I've myself been coached on Zoom. I've, done the coaching on Zoom, and there really is a true energetic exchange and true depth to what you can feel in that connection online.
Absolutely. And I was really struck. I ran the first one in January, and I was a little nervous that it wouldn't feel like a women's circle. I was so used to doing them in like a sweet birth center where you're all like sitting around with your tea and hanging out. And we just had that experience. We do keep it very small. So
I was going to ask how many people are in.
Small, tight group. Because I think that, you can't have more than like 13 people kind of to actually see everybody on the Zoom screen. It gets kind of like,
right.
See everybody. So keeping it small is one way that we keep that tight container and connection. But that being said, it didn't, I love being in person, and it didn't feel like there was something missing.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah.
And it's certainly for mothers, it's very convenient to be able to like go in your bedroom and close a door and not have to like go out somewhere, figure out more, like be gone longer. I know that that's like can be difficult.
Right.
So like, with just like, because we do ask moms to be there with themselves. Like the time is for themselves. Prioritizing your healing. We talk about that as like the foundation of what we're doing is that you are a better mother. You are a better person. You can show up more fully in your life without this trauma bogging you down.
Right.
In any aspect of your life. But the birth is a potent opportunity. I mean, it's a potent opportunity for anyone to really take that, what happens in that time, as like a huge opportunity for growth.
I was just going to say, it's definitely a portal to awakening.
Yes.
If we're willing to see that. And there is nothing wrong if you haven't realized that or recognized that, because we can't undo all the years of being trained that it's not that. And like that, and just have it gone. But it really is a portal to awakening. And I often think about my journey in motherhood, and I'm like, wow, it really, like, I always mothered in a very unique way. I just had that mothering sense with my sister, family. But wow, the portal of awakening in motherhood. And it took me many years to catch up and realize that's what happened, that I started my spiritual journey upon entering motherhood. And I look back and I'm like, oh, well, yeah, that was when I started going to an acupuncturist. That was when I started using herbs over medications prescribed by doctors. That was when I first decided I was going to stand up and go against anything a doctor prescribed. Interestingly, like it just was this innate knowing, like, yeah, but I don't know if I really want to be on that unless I have to be. Like, let's see. And it wasn't that I didn't want to take care of myself. It was something inside of me. This is what worked for me. Like, I knew that, I don't know. And for me, what I'm referencing is I was actually at one point with the first panic attack prescribed antidepressants, which is fine. I know that they have their place and their time. And I used them for 6 months. And I went to my family doctor and I was like, I have to shift off of these. They don't feel correct to me. And while I feel better, I feel like there might be other routes for me to explore. And it was all because I could remember hearing my grandmother say her entire life, I got to get my nerve pill. And so I had this like trigger in my mind, like I'm on a nerve pill. But I also believe it was just the awakening, like that portal of motherhood that just taught me to start tuning in with me versus what everybody else said. And I definitely do not discount medications. I believe just like, hospitals and safety, and we have to take care of every piece of the
Sure.
puzzle.
Yeah. And
I know for myself, it was an awakening journey to coming home to the holistic approach that I definitely am more aligned with, and also just more aware of, aware of what I was feeling inside and trusting that I was going to stand up to that for myself.
Sure. Well, and there's a place for all of it. I mean, both of my births ended up happening in a hospital. But I can say that the first birth and the second birth were very, very different based on what I had learned. And the experience for myself was that I had a very spiritually connected and conscious birth experience the second time, whereas the first time I was so thrown off energetically, and so just I was back on my heels. I had no idea what was going on. That I didn't even know how to show up for myself to ask for what I was needing. And that's where a lot of the trauma actually set in for me. And so I think that it's very common that you going into it, you don't know what you need and what you're going to want. So it's very important that people, gather these wise women around them and women who can really show up for you. Not just women. I shouldn't just say women. There are very awesome conscious men out there as well.
Right.
But in birth, it's typically a women's thing. And that can show up for you and sort of like advocate for you and be there for you. And I had a wonderful birth team, but I didn't even know what I needed or wanted.
Right. We very rarely know.
The whole thing was such a humbling thing. And it's just perfect that I'm doing this work now.
Well, and I
feel like for me, it was a huge catapult down my spiritual path. That experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And just layers and layers and layers of learning that have come out from that potent experience. So, and I continue to learn from it and continue to see in my connection with my daughter too, like how our relationship unfolds and how our connection unfolds. How as I do more work on that experience, she benefits.
And I would actually say even the learning and the unlearning in motherhood, like that, how much those two go together, that we think we're just, learning. Like, here I am, here's my current stack, I'm learning. But then even as I read something and I'm like, oh, or the mirror that my daughters are to me.
Oh gosh.
And I begin to recognize things and unlearn who I am, who I showed up as, what has been passed down. I just podcasted this week. The episode was on roles that we play in our family, because I am in a current process of unlearning the roles and sitting with the feeling of that being uncomfortable. And man, if birth is not a precursor to sitting in motherhood and being uncomfortable all the time, I don't know what else could be. Like, that is definitely the kickoff to being uncomfortable. And if you think you're only uncomfortable for 24 hours or 8 hours or 17 hours, you're going to have a lifetime of uncomfortable. Like, it's just sitting in it and recognizing. And, I love, like, when a conscious man, or when, my husband and I'll share some deep, like, did you think about how that is me, that part of your relationship with this daughter is playing into who you, or how you showed up, or how you were mothered or fathered or whatever. But we're all here to unlearn, and motherhood is just the epitome of sitting in the uncomfortable feelings And it all starts with that birth. And, for me, without motherhood, I would not have even recognized. I don't know what would have forced me to recognize the trauma and the generational trauma that was following me, and just what was stuck deep inside. I don't know. And I'm hopeful that at some point it would have come out. I would never have known. But for me, never was there a more important time to heal, if not for them. And as much as it's for them, it's for me. Like, it's just so much. Like, I see how much the healing of the trauma has done for me, but then what it's done for them. And then the hopefulness of what it will do for their future children and going forward. Because somewhere along the line, we have to start embodying ourselves and our feelings and sitting with them and being uncomfortable so that we can pass that on as being sacred, not scary, to our future generations.
Yes. Yeah. Sacred, not scary. That is a very good way.
That's just a random one that came out, like sacred, not scary. It's so sacred. It's like a sacred space to sit in the uncomfortable, sacred space to be in the birth. And our society has just gone so far away and is now coming back from it being sacred space. And we've made it a scary space, because the minute one thing maybe doesn't progress correctly, we're all up in arms. And in some situations, the health is at concern. And that's a major point. But at other times, it could just be we all hear the story about the OBGYN that has to make a golf course date or whatever, and they are pushing the woman to go faster. Or we use medication to get it to go faster. And I don't know. I just think really the sacredness of sharing about a birth really is amazing in your work or whatever, because it will really create, I hope it starts to take on more and more, just all of this, everybody that that this is their work and their passion, because I feel like the next generation, we need it, but they need it.
Yeah. I mean, so a couple of things you're speaking to are I'm not a birth worker and I'm not in the hospital a lot. So this is just my opinion. And from the nurses and people who are working in the hospital more frequently, it's not a very trauma-informed space. And so they're not trained to be present with people. They're not trained to be conscious about the whole person, like a mother-centric birth experience. It's gotten very like, you're going into the body mechanic. And, birth does have, for generations prior to more modern medical practices, and still in many populations, like there are maternal and fetal death rates. And so, there's always that risk, and that's always being played out, that there's that fear. But I think the medical establishment's reaction to that fear is to pull back from being present and vulnerable with their patients instead of leaning into being with them. And I've heard that it's changing a lot with nurses and labor and delivery. And like the hospital where I birthed one child, they were very present. The hospital where I birthed another child, they were not. So it definitely depends where you are birthing. And, but what I saw was like just trauma can get set in just by the fact that what's happening to you is scary and there's no one there to see you or meet you or be present with you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's not what is happening. It's how you're met and how your humanness and your vulnerability is held that a lot of times has a traumatic experience or traumatic reaction sink in.
Yeah.
And so get hooked into your your nervous system and your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's,
well, it's interesting that you
such,
bring that
it's
up.
such rich, it's just such a rich place to look. Like, oh, like, I bet if the medical staff had just been with me a little bit more through that process, instead of just like, no, like heartbeat's dropping, let's go, like rush, rush, rush. Like, you know, I wonder what would have, you know, like just a soft hand on my shoulder, like it's going to be okay. Like someone who's really present with you.
Right.
Just even that can be a huge, huge, and I hear stories from women who weren't traumatized by their experience because there was that awesome nurse who was with me the whole time, looking me in the eyes, like, you can do this. I know you're scared. Just take a deep breath. Like those kind of things, that really helps.
That is like, we are all here to be seen and heard.
Yes, exactly.
And if we're not getting that need met in childbirth, it's frightening. Yeah. And I can share, I had those two exact situations. I probably, as you're saying this, I'm getting the hit that like, I didn't think my first daughter was a traumatic birth because Peg, note right there, 17 years later, I remember her name. Peg, the nurse, held my hand, looked me in the eye. She got like on my level, even as the contractions were really hard, even as I'm supposed to be pushing and bearing in and, you know, she was just there. She was very she was a little older. It was an older Catholic church that I had, older Catholic hospital that I had decided the midwives that time chose that hospital. They had a water birth area that we were hopeful I would be able to give birth in. And that's why we chose that hospital. The nurse was a little older, very grandmotherly. She was probably only in her 50s, looking back, like probably 50s, maybe early 60s. But to me at that point, she looked like a really like steadfast grandma. And she was seeing me through this. And my mom and sister were there. But to be honest, my sister was 16, had never had a baby. So she, she did witness. She witnessed 2 births prior to her own own children. My mom came from the generation where like she was there. And I remember her holding my hand and encouraging me, but it wasn't, I think it just came from a different generation of like, you're not really in it, like in the you don't like the emotions of it. And
the presence,
like the nurse, and she was wonderful. She held me up and, walked me through it. And I would say like even knew how to count better than my husband. But it still was different. That nurse was so there. The second birth, it just like the birth was beautiful, but even like the nurse, I just remember it feeling much more like just get the job done.
Yeah.
And it was in a teaching hospital. I had the midwife again, and all hell broke loose afterwards. But I just remember it feeling like going. And when you're talking about the trauma getting stuck in that moment of fear, I shared with you when we were talking last week, like I had that moment in that afterbirth where I said, I'm dying. And they just, instead of even my midwife, who I adored, instead of meeting me in that fear, answer was, no, you're not. You're in a hospital.
Right.
Okay. Well, and I remember saying to her, I work in this hospital and people die every day. And the fear in my husband's eyes, the fear in my sister's eyes, my mom ran out of the room. I can't do this. Like I remember hearing her say, I can't do this. And I remember saying, get me my blessed cross and get that on my neck. Like now, like I just thought, oh my God, I'm seriously dying. And I question, I have had for my youngest will be 15. For 15 years, I have battled these intense, like, oh my gosh, my heart just palpitated. I must be dying. Oh my gosh. Like I have a pain here. I must have a tumor. I must and it's me. Like, it sounds like I'm this crazy anxious person, but I believe there's just trauma lodged in areas that, like, when I said, I think I'm dying, and everybody just discounted it and threw it off, and nobody sat in the present. I mean, my poor husband looked like he was as white as a ghost, and he was like, he didn't know what to do. And there I am vocalizing that. Nobody in the birth who sees births all the time got with me. And said, there was only one moment, the midwife, as I'm being rushed down the hallway to surgery, the midwife said, I got you. I'm here next to you. I wish somebody would have told me that 20 minutes prior, when I swear to God I was dying. Because then the next thing I remember seeing was a bright light and hearing she's going under. And I'm like, what? I mean, I seriously thought I was dying. And all these years later, every little thing health-wise that hits, I'm like, oh my God, what if I die? I must be dying. And it really makes me wonder, like, the whole traumatic birth and not being seen and heard in that moment of, like, this is a genuine fear. It probably is coming through from generations.
Well, there is
somebody else had to have had that, you know, and there was a sincere fear.
The fear of death, when it's actually happening, is a survival mechanism. So that is we're biologically designed to fear death. And it's like in the lower parts of our brain, like we're always tracking whether that's going to happen or not. The triggering that you're talking about, though, with your nervous system now, like, oh, I like felt something weird in my body. Am I going to die? Like, those triggers are definitely out of your control. So it's an interesting thing to work with the trauma, and why we usually need to go into more embodiment practices, into more practices that calm the brain down. Because where that lives in our brain, we can't talk ourselves out of a trigger. You cannot talk yourself out of being anxious about dying. Because you can't, because where that lives in our brain, it's not something that you access by your forebrain, by the prefrontal cortex. It doesn't live there. And by doing these practices, which interestingly, ceremonies for millennia across all cultures have different elements that bring your into these slower states that allow you to access this part of your brain to free it from these traumatic triggers. So it's like humming, drumming, dancing, chanting, movement, compassionate connection, being with somebody who's really present with you. And it's fascinating that we as humans, trauma has always existed as long as there's been humans. I mean, people die. It's the cycle of life. You're being chased by a tiger. What is not natural is that we are always acting like that now. Because we have lost our deep connection to these somatic and embodiment resources and practices that we used to practice communally, just as part of the everyday thing that you did. The cycle of living in a community would have these community practices built in. And we've just lost that.
Absolutely. And I remember.
So like, you can let yourself off the hook that you're getting triggered.
Like, I'm crazy. We're constantly triggered by this.
We all are.
Yeah, we all have our thing. Like, that's what I say.
And
like, we all got our thing.
That was like revolutionary for me. Like, oh, getting triggered, having your trauma re-triggered is like not even in your conscious control.
Right.
So, but it can feel really vulnerable and embarrassing because you're like, why am I freaking out every time this happens? Like, now, if you're doing personal growth and you know about this stuff, you're like, like, come on, I know about this. Is this thing my kid's doing like freaking me out? Or like you're saying, like you're gasping every time you're like, oh, it's so embarrassing. Like, I want to feel great about my daughter swimming, not like, is she going to die? But like knowing that, like, oh, this isn't a part of my brain and my being that really needs like embodiment support and the sense of safety and being seen and back to seen and held.
Absolutely. And I know
that does so much.
It does.
For the healing and the unhooking from the trauma response. So you can be more resourcell. You can respond, not react. You can feel more coherent. You can feel more present, like more, you have more access to your intuition and your inspiration and like, you know, what you're wanting to create versus just being this constant reaction.
Right.
Because you're trying to keep yourself safe.
Right. Well, and I know I saw on Instagram today, you posted a pile of books that were like your books for your, you know, the most impactful books for your life. And of course, like I have this one on my pile, you know, so we share that one. I have not even, as you could see by my pile, I've got a pile. So I don't necessarily like blow through the whole book. I go back and I'm like, oh yeah, this book was profound in me just recognizing the, like that freeze state or the, you know, the flight, the fight and embodying. And to the extent of like, I do that shower exercise that he talks about all the time. Like I have some dental issues. And recently when the dental issues peak, I get in the shower and just put the pulsating head like on the location. Within 24 hours, it moves out of my body. I mean, it's the most profound. So like you learn to be just aware instead of freaking out like, oh my God. I mean, even the other day when I said something like, I feel this, then, you know, I hope it's nothing. And my husband looked at me and he's like, do you want to go for a walk? I'm like, okay, like, let's go for a walk. Like, my tendency as a child from trauma, from the wounds is to get in my head, like worst case scenario, trauma, you know, freak out. But when I get in my body, it's so much clearer and I can make logical sense as to, oh yeah, well, this is going on. So of course I'm feeling that. And you know, in my spiritual journey, there was a point where I referenced to my one coach that I had just run a 5K and it had brought me to tears, but I felt embarrassed crying because I wasn't a runner. I was like running it with my daughter in a race and I was embarrassed because other people were around and I didn't want to cry in front of them. And I said, I don't know. And as she was leaving my house that day, she was like, just an invitation, keep running. And I was like, keep running. So a month later, I signed up for my first half marathon. And in the midst of the training, I realized exactly what she was telling me to do was to get in my body. But at that point in who I was and where I was on my spiritual journey, I was not in my body. And if she would have said, run to get in your body, I would have been like, what? What is she talking about? I thought I was just looking to access tears. Like I thought she thought it was like something, you know, emotional that needed to come out. And it was, but it had to exist in my body first. Like I had to be pushed to the limit of feeling it and overcoming some fears in the embodiment of running. And there's so much to that. Keep running. I'm like, what? And I said to my husband, she told me to keep running. And so like 2 weeks later, he sends me an email and it's from his work that says they would pay for all the applicants who were going to sign up for this particular race. And I emailed him back and I'm like, sign me up for the half. And he was like, you thought you were going to die at the 5K. And I was like, sign me up for the half. Let's see. and I did it. Like I did 2 in 6 months and I haven't run a half since, but with COVID and that you get away from it. But it was a phase of my life where I needed to understand embodying, like getting back into feeling my body. I had stopped feeling for so long in my body, but Yeah. So I know you love that book. What's your top book on, I know you just read one that you loved, but like, do you have a top book on trauma and birth experiences and, shifting through in motherhood for that?
Yeah. So I think I have I'm looking at my pile over there. I think for birth in general, the birthing from within, and then now Britta Bushnell just wrote this book called Transformed by Birth. That really speaks to what I'm talking about, and the stand I am for women to really embrace their birth experience as an opportunity for transformation and growth, no matter what shape or form it takes. I think that the natural birth world is amazing, but it also has created sort of an overlay for women that if they don't get that there's something wrong with them. And that something, if you're desiring that experience and you don't get it, for me, that was a big part of my trauma, was actually sort of what I called self-inflicted, harsh judgment trauma of feeling like I failed because I ended up with an emergent C-section that was very scary for both me and my child. And so
yeah, I could say that.
That was a lot of the work I personally did. And I see that a lot with, mothers just mourning the loss of what they wanted and didn't get. And so I really love her approach, because she really talks about birth as a transformation, and like the heroine's journey, it is a journey into the underworld, into the mystery. It is not about, and underworld journeys are not like kumbaya and sitting in a hot tub giving birth. I mean, it is you need to show up to do your work. That's what shadow work is.
Is exactly right. Yep. No running. No running from that. Commit. And
exactly. Exactly. So just seizing it as that opportunity. So I love her new book. It's brand new. It's just came out. And then the one that I just fall back on that is my all-time favorite is Tami Lynn Kent is a pelvic floor therapist. Actually, she's from Portland. So I just got to study with her and meet her and see her in this last year, which has been amazing. But I've followed her work for a really long time. And her book is called Mothering from Your Center. And it's all about really honoring the sacred feminine in your motherhood journey.
I'm going to have to pick that one up, add it to my pile.
Yes. It talks a lot about doing some energy work on the birth field. If she talks about how that there's an energy field around the birth experience, and that how to repair that and work with that. She talks a lot about how to prepare yourself going into birth, and then just approaching motherhood from a very feminine and embodied place, and letting go of a lot of the conditioning that we're talking about, the learning and unlearning. So I adore her work and her approach. She has 3 books: Wild Feminine, Mothering from Your Center, and Wild Creative. And they're all amazing. Really incredible works. So
I'm going to go on Amazon and put all of them in my save for later. I have a 50 books in my save for later. And then I see what I'm called to.
She's just she says that, because she works, doing pelvic floor therapy. So she said that she's the spokeswoman for women's pelvises. Like, and that's how like this energy work that she has created, like she's like, women's pelvises told me about this. Women's bodies are like, this is like energetically what's going on and stuff. And so she's just, I'm very inspired and influenced by her work, and she's just incredible. So
it sounds it. Let's put those on, and I'll make sure I put those links in the show notes for anybody who's interested. I know, gosh, it's just an enlightening conversation. And I think it was like the power of women coming together and honoring birth and motherhood and womanhood and the feminine instead of just the conditioning that we've, zombied through for so long. And I am curious, as we wrap up, what would be your invitation to other moms that are looking to or understand, not really understand, but like healing their own birth trauma or recognizing it? Like maybe your first step. Like, I don't know. I met you, and you were actually the first person that I ever met that this was your passion and your work and your focus as you mentor other women. So finding that group, or, what's the one step they can take to ensuring that they start healing their birth trauma prior to birth or after birth?
Yeah. The very first step, I would say, is tapping into self-compassion. Compassion for either what you've gone through or what you're going to go through, and being connected. And if you don't know what compassion means or self-compassion means, look it up, learn about it. There's wonderful meditations all over the place. But having compassion, a soft heart for ourselves and what the experience that you've either had or going through, is just such good medicine. It's such good medicine. And it gives you the space to really be vulnerable and tell the truth about what happened.
I would feel, a great add-on to that is to find yourself someone that will see and hear you through that self-compassion as well, because it is and it may not be your mom, and it may not be your sister or your aunt or your midwife, and they would certainly be, in my eyes, 17 years ago, I thought that was, and she was profoundly different than in, most OBGYNs that I've seen. But find yourself your person who's going to see and hear you, and let you honor that self-compassion and meet you there in it.
There's a wonderful organization that I'm a part of called the Association of Pre and Perinatal Psychology, and it's APPPAH, I think, APA, and there's a wealth of knowledge on that site, and practitioners all over the country, actually all over the world, that offer this work and this support. Of course, I'd love to have anyone in a circle.
Well, I was going to say, and your circles are on Zoom, so you can definitely do that.
Yeah, innerwisdommotherhood.com. But reaching out for support. Give yourself a lot of compassion, lots of hugs for yourself, mamas.
Yeah, because you're going to need it all of motherhood.
Yeah, exactly.
I know. Just the other month, as my daughters get older, we are constantly having to remind ourselves of the self-compassion of either how we showed up or how we wanted to show up. And it just happens a cycle over and over and over in motherhood. And my friend said to me, you're going to have to embrace self-compassion and self-forgiveness on this. Like you cannot. And she is sort of that person that I go to, and she sees me and hears me, and I'm reminded because, I know that, but yet in the midst of the birth, in the midst of motherhood, it's so easy to go off and like totally blaming yourself, blaming your body, blaming, your actions, and to have the compassion and the forgiveness for yourself to, every moment in the present is a new moment, and you don't know, and you just show up to the best. Like I always remind myself, to the best that I could, and with compassion. So yeah, it's going to keep coming back around. So well, I will definitely be connecting your link to your website and your Instagram on the show notes, and you just referenced that. But I'm so glad that you were able to come on here and share with our listeners all about what you do. Maybe we'll even have you back at another point. There'll be another topic that sort of connects in, because it's just such an interesting, insight and thought to birthing and motherhood, and something that I wish I had leaned in on or had even heard of, 17 years ago.
That's the whole thing is like, the more awareness we build around it, I think the less traumatic
absolutely
birth is going to be for people. So that's like our whole goal, is educating people.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on here today. And it was such an honor to have you here, and a joy to get to talk to you. So
thank you so much.
Thank you. You have a great day. Bye-bye. Hey friends, thanks for joining me on this week's episode of the Intuitive Mother podcast. I am so deeply grateful for each and every one of you that has listened in, whether it's your 50th episode or first episode. You taking the time to share this sacred space with me means the world to me and warms my heart. Of course, I would love to hear from each and every one of you about what interviews you loved and what you want to hear more of. Drop me a line at Angie@angieschaefer.com. On my website, you can also learn more about the programs that I'm offering and the coaching and healings that are also available for each one of you as you journey home to your sacred self. I am thankful for you spending your time with me, and I cannot wait to share another episode with you next week. Have a great day.